So I have managed to get my hands on the brand new Canon R8. And if you're wondering if this camera is any good, then yes, it's awesome. But this should come as no surprise, as the R8 shares the same sensor as its bigger brother, the Canon R6 Mark II, which is another great camera that I have owned and used for a while now. Today I want to take a quick look at both cameras for a short comparison, as for some people, the R8 may be the better buy over the R6 Mark II, thanks to it coming in cheaper and sharing many of the main features of the R6 Mark II. Not only that, but some of the design choices that Canon have made with the R8 may make it the perfect camera for some people out there. So I wanted to explore some of those main differences in this video and hopefully help you decide between these two amazing cameras. So of course, the most important thing is image quality. As mentioned earlier, apparently these two cameras share the same 24 megapixel sensor, but I wanted to compare photo and video quality just to check there isn't some difference in camera processing or color rendering between the two cameras. And I'm happy to confirm for photo there isn't. I compared the two cameras for portraits, as you can see here, as well as some landscape shots. And using the same lens, same white balance and picture profile, these cameras give you as close to the exact same results as any two cameras I have ever used. They match up perfectly. This makes the R8 a great B cam if you already own an R6 II, as you can treat the files exactly the same, saving you some time compared to other cameras such as my R5 or old R6, which always needed some tweaking to match the colours of the R6 Mark II. So this means photos aren't being processed any differently than the R6 Mark II. However, I'm afraid to say the R8 lacks a mechanical shutter, which is a shame and can present some issues to photographers. This means shutter speed maxes out at 1/4000 in electronic first curtain mode. The R8 is also a slower camera in general, shooting at a max of 6 frames per second in that electronic first curtain shutter mode against the R6 Mark II's 12 frames per second. In electronic shutter, it shoots at a blazing fast 30 frames per second, not far off the R6 Mark II, but then its biggest issue is its buffer. You'll get around 50 shots before the buffer fills up, whereas the R6 II can get up to 100, as well as clearing its buffer much faster. A big deal if you shoot sports or wildlife. In photo mode, I found the autofocus to be flawless, just like the R6 Mark II. I won't cover it too much because it is one element of the camera that I have zero complaints. It shares all the same focusing modes as the R6 Mark II. It is some of the best autofocus on any camera I have ever tried. Now taking a quick look again at video, these cameras matched up perfectly, as expected. So again, no perceivable difference in processing in the video mode either. It shares all the same video modes and codecs as the R6 Mark II, and I love the colours and details coming out of the R8. For a small, full-frame camera in this price bracket, it punches way above its weight. In 50p, again, it matches up perfectly as expected. This is a really contrasty situation, and the R8 handled it perfectly, just like the R6 Mark II. It has excellent dynamic range. The R8 has some of the best quality 4K 50p of any camera on the market right now, let alone in this price range. So rest assured, the image quality in these two cameras are identical. So let's move on to some of the other key differences between the two cameras. So a big one that will probably put a lot of people off the R8 is the lack of IBIS. But just how big of a deal is that? Let's find out. So here's a walking shot with the R8 with no stabilisation at all. You can see the jitters from each step I take, but it looks pretty good considering. And now here's the R6 II, using just the camera's IBIS for stabilisation, so you can see the difference between IBIS and no IBIS. It's much smoother, but with some jerky movements where the IBIS fights you a little. Let's compare that to the R8 using just digital IS with the same lens. And I'm so impressed with the digital IS, it is so smooth without the jerkiness or corner wobble of the R6 Mark II's IBIS. Here's the R8 with a stabilised lens. It looks pretty good, but you can still see jitters from my steps. A little stabilisation in post would clear this up though. And finally, here is the R6 II with both lens IS and IBIS. And this is as close as you get to a gimbal look. But look at the weird corner artifacts and wobbles. This could really ruin a shot. So on that subject, let's explore the dreaded Canon corner wobble a little more. Could it be a thing of the past with the R8 thanks to its removal of IBIS? Here's the R6 II on a really wide angle lens, and look at the artifacting in the left side of the frame. It doesn't look good and it's really hard to fix in post. Now here's the R8 with just the lens IS and the wobble is gone. Yet you sacrifice a little smoothness but nothing a little stabilisation in post can't fix, which you can see here. So for the sake of it, here's a vlogging example of the R6 II, and this issue comes up a lot in this situation, as you can see here in the top corners. Now here's the R8, the artifacting is gone, sure, but you certainly lose some of the smoothness. Here's that same clip on the R8 with stabilisation in post, which I think probably looks the best. So after comparing the various stabilisation options in both cameras, for people that are picking up the R8 for video, that lack of IBIS may actually be an advantage in some certain scenarios. In the R6 Mark II and many of Canon's other mirrorless cameras, you cannot turn off the IBIS and just rely on lens IS. I've wished you could do this for a while, as the IBIS in the camera is actually often the culprit for many of those corner artifacts and wobbles that you get on Canon cameras. With the R8 lacking IBIS, similar to other cinema cameras like the R5C or the C70, if you invest in stabilised lenses, which the RF mount have many great stabilised lenses, you can get amazing results and avoid that annoying corner wobble, especially on wider angle lenses. It's also great to know that the digital IS in these cameras is very good too. The R8 with the digital IS turned on looked amazing. Of course, in some scenarios you can't beat that combination of IBIS and lens IS for that super smooth, almost gimbal-like footage. But hopefully I've shown you with the R8 you do have a few options that get very close to that without the downsides. Now let's move on to overheating and battery life. 25p is the most important mode to me, where the R6 II doesn't overheat at all, recording until the battery runs out at 2 hours and 25 minutes. The R8 however will overheat in 25p, but the battery will likely run out before that happens. On a fully charged battery I got just over an hour of 4K 25p before the battery died and the temperature gauge showed it was heating up. In 4K 50p, both cameras will overheat. The R6 II does well though, and the battery ran out after almost an hour and a half, but it was getting close to overheating. The R8 certainly performs worse, where after testing a few times I would consistently get between 30 and 40 minutes before the camera would overheat in 50p. So unfortunately the R8 overheats in all 4K modes, but seems to be more reliable than the original R6 I would say. I guess these thermals are a result of the smaller body. And in terms of battery life, in these tests the R8 battery would consistently last only half as long as the R6 II. In general, the smaller battery of the R8 is quite apparent in heavy use, particularly in video. In photo however, I found the performance pretty good. I recently shot over 1,000 images in the space of around 2 hours or so and did not lose a bar of battery. Now let's look at handling, where there are some significant changes made here. The R8 has a much smaller and lighter body compared to the R6 II, more similar to the Canon RP. Build quality still feels great though. I really like this smaller design. It has the typical Canon ergonomics, but it does have a significantly smaller grip. So if you have larger hands like me, it won't be as comfortable as the R6 II, especially when using heavier lenses. Side by side, you can clearly see the size difference between these two cameras. And I was really impressed with the R8 screen. The quality is excellent. The screen is actually a little wider than the R6 II's at the cost of some height. The R6 II has the higher quality EVF, but I found regardless the R8's to be really good. There are some unfortunate omissions on the R8's design, including the change from the R6 II's command dial to a D-pad. I'm not a fan of this because I use this for aperture normally and I really miss it when I don't have it. And it's also missing a joystick, and the AF button has been slightly repositioned. Again, I prefer the original layout of the R6 II. The AF button isn't as comfortable to reach for on this smaller body, but might be preferential to somebody with smaller hands. The R8 has the same micro HDMI port as the R6 II, which isn't too surprising. So Canon have opted for a single card slot on the R8, which is a shame for working professionals who need that peace of mind, where the R6 II may be the safer choice in this case thanks to it having dual card slots. Another thing to bear in mind is that the R8 doesn't have a mechanical shutter, so when the camera is powered off the sensor is exposed, unlike the R6 II where it is protected by the shutter. Finally, the cameras unfortunately, as covered earlier, do not share the same battery. The R8 has a much smaller battery with much less capacity, resulting in the poorer battery life we saw earlier. So that rounds out the comparison. For people that have been eyeing up the R6 Mark II since release, the R8 may be a great cheaper alternative considering it gives you the same great image quality in both photo and video. I think the biggest hurdle I have recommending it to working professionals is the lack of dual card slots, the relatively poor battery life, and of course the fact that it overheats in all 4K modes. It does however come with its own advantages. That lack of IBIS can have some situational benefits for videographers, and the smaller, lighter body makes for an amazing travel camera and an awesome gimbal camera too. Other than that annoying lack of mechanical shutter and pretty poor buffer depth, I found this to be a pretty overall excellent photo camera, and I'm looking forward to using it more for photo in the coming weeks. So let me know down below what you think of the R8 and if you have any questions regarding this camera. I'm going to be releasing another video in the next week or so showing a full portrait photo shoot using just the R8. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this video helped, and I will see you guys in the next one.